So here we have a leg and chump of pork, which is to be boned and seamed out into individual muscles. But before we start, just checking the table. For competition, you need a nice clear working surface, tools that you're going to use close by and kept safely, and our trays for collecting the trim, fat and bones and gristles. So as I say, we've got a full leg and chump of pork, and our first role is to remove some of the bone and then peel back some of the rind so we can actually see the definition of each individual muscle for us to follow down. So to start then, I'm going to remove some of the fat and then the underlying pad of meat on the inside of the hip bone. As we go, it's always good to trim as you go along of the meat you're working on to hold the work steady. It's much easier to do it this way than try and trim lots of little pieces after we've separated all the muscles. Trimming as we go along and also separating as we go along. What the judge is looking for is clean, methodic working, and you shouldn't be putting anything in the fat, bone or trim box unless you're happy for the judge to judge it, because the judge doesn't know that you want to come back to the trimming at the end of the exercise. So out comes that pad. As I'm working, I'm looking as though I don't want to cut into any of the underlying muscle. It's also advisable as well to keep your mince and your dice pieces separate. I want to remove the tailbone. To do that, I just want to go through the little bone, work around. Always work so that you can see what you're doing. And all I'm using is the point end of the boning knife. And again, same as the trim and the fat, I'm trimming the bone. So again, I don't have to take that bone out and retrim at the end of the exercise. I have a little bit of muscle that runs on the end of the hip bone. Again, just the point of the knife working around close to the bone. And I can take that little group of muscle off at this point. Again, just making sure we've trimmed accordingly. So a little bit of gristle, lean, and a pad here. But on the underside, you can see thick silver gristle. So again, it's important that we take that away from the muscle. So any thick silvers to be taken off. It doesn't get left in the meat trim or in the fat trim. We're keeping it separate. Here, I just want to remove the tailbone, and to do that, I want to put the knife in a cartilage pad that runs between the tailbone and the hip bone. So it's putting the knife through there, lifting up, and then just the tip of the knife working round the remainder of the tailbone, and that can be then taken out all in one piece. So now I want to remove the hip bone. It's finding an easy way so you can see where you're working. Tip of the knife close to the bone, working nice and tightly to the bone. All I'm using is probably a 1/4 inch the tip of that knife, so that I'm always in control of the knife. I'm not using full length of the blade to go burying into the underlying muscle. What the judges will be looking for is nice clean boning and no deep slashes and cuts on the underside of the muscle. So we've cut through the hip and bone joint. I just need to turn round. I can open this up now and work along the edge of the bone. Again, being careful not to cut deep into the muscle. And out comes the bone. Now again, it's important, if there's a little bit of meat on the bone, we scrape that at this point, because once we put the bone into the box or tray, it's telling the judge it's ready for judging. So the more meat left on that bone, the more points you could lose. So it's about taking care and getting clean bones. What I want to do now is remove the top side muscle. So we're going to take the whole top side off in one piece, but to do so I need to cut the rind down and peel it open. And again, it's just the tip of the knife we're using. Remember, when stealing the knife, just to wipe the blade before we start working again. I'm just peeling the rind back. It will expose the seams of the muscle, the seams that we're looking for. So again, trimming as we go along. Also, we've done the front of the leg. I also now want to work the other way. I follow that round until I get to the seam, which is the end of the top side, and that becomes the silver side. So I've basically uncovered and exposed all of the top side muscle. So now we're going to take out the top side muscle in its entirety, following the natural seams between the muscles. And again, it's just using the tip of the knife to go in between the muscles. And once I start getting in to the muscle, just a little further with the tip of the knife, I can then start using my fingers to actually feel my way through in between the muscles. So it's just exposing the main seam to start with the tip of the knife, and if we follow that nicely down, that'll take us onto the back of the main leg bone. We've got a little bit of bone damage to the head of the main leg bone or the femur, so we've just got to be a little bit careful as we're following through so that we don't get any bone splinters. Again, it's just working our way over the knee joint, and as soon as we've freed it over, I can get my thumb or fingers in there, feeling the way, because I can't do any damage with my fingers in there. So it's just following that seam, and all the knife is doing is just freeing it where we get locked. So you can see now we're in that seam. No damage has been done to the underlying muscle. Tip of the knife is just finding our way through the connective tissue. You can feel the muscle giving away and freeing as we just move down between the seams, and just following the contour of that muscle, and that will take us out our whole top side of pork. So what we have here now is the leg opened up, so it's exposing internal pockets of fat, silver gristles, a little bit of blood meat and gristle, silver gristles, and our bone. So what we're looking at now is to bone out the rest of the leg as before, using the tip of the knife, following along the full length of the bone. And then if we can get our fingers down or the back of the blade of the knife, run it along so we can get into the bone sheath between the bone and the muscle. So we're pushing that away, so we're skinning the bone, and then where it's locked, we're moving up round by the kneecap, following through the joint, and then coming up the other end, which is the ball and socket end of the hip, and we're going to work around the whole of the bone and come back down here to the kneecap area. So we'll just come along this side of the bone, again just being careful not to go too deep into the meat. Now at this point I'm not going to be worried too much about taking out that bruise. I'll leave that in at the moment until we come to further trimming. And if you're in competition and you've got a bruise like that, it's always good to let the judge know before you get any further. You look to see where the bone movement is, and then it's just putting the knife into that joint, following it around, but again not going too deep, and there is our bone that comes out nice and clean, ready for the judging. The knuckle is going to come off in one piece, and this will be left with the bone in, unless it is specified that that has to be boned out. But at this point, we're just going to follow again the natural seams around the knuckle meat. So there is our pork hock or shank all out in one without any cut surfaces. We still have one bone left in, and that is our kneecap. So again, we must remember to remove that. It's a little bone that is easily forgotten in competition. So we can take that out at this point, or we need to make sure it comes out when we take the knuckle meat. It's up to the individual where we start, but at this point it's always good to work our way down to clear the way. So you can see here we've got vein and artery, we've got blood meat, we have white gristles, thick white silver gristles, and we've got pockets of fat inside the leg. So at this point it will pay us to trim as we go along. We've got that thin little chain muscle. It's going to come off, so it's trimmed ready, goes in our mince. I've got a small pad of muscle here that will have a thick silver plate of gristle underneath. So again, I'm just lightly removing that to expose that gristle. So this is on the underside of the pork chump or the rump. So we're just knife under, and then just working our way under that plate of gristle back down to where the tail was, and we can skin that off. Just trimming around where the tail area is. We'll come back to that. What we can do now is remove the knuckle that's still got the kneecap in, and then we will remove the rump. So at this point we have a triangular wedge of fat at the end of the knuckle, and it runs along the rump tail. So I want to be in between the knuckle and the rump tail. So we're following that through, and also we just need to lift up the rump, the gristle, so that we can see where that muscle is going. So once we've removed the wedge of fat, it gives us a clearer view of the muscles. Now you've got several muscles here. We're going to separate them all anyway as we get further on, taking all this block out in one piece. And at this point I can work around the kneecap. So we're going to take out the kneecap. So there's our kneecap trimmed, and then it's just our final little bit of separating our pork knuckle or thick flank. So what we have now is three main muscle groups still left. We have our heel muscle, we have our rump, and we have the silver side underneath both of those. So at this point I'm going to remove the heel, and again, as before, I'm going to trim as we go along, so any surface fat can be removed, any thick silver gristles can be removed, and then we follow round the contour of the muscle. Again, it's the point of the knife, the tip. I don't want to be using the full length of the blade. It can't be controlled properly. You have more control of just using the tip and working round. So in that way we don't damage any of the underlying muscle. And all the time I'm looking to see, as I'm pulling the muscle away, the connective tissue separating, for me just to separated through. So that is the heel muscle coming off. So that is our heel muscle, all off in one piece, ready for further trimming. Just make sure our work surface is kept clean. Don't forget the judge is always looking around the table. Make sure our knife is sharp, especially the point. And here we're going to remove the rump, first of all by following the seam between the rump and the rump tail. Again, it's just following into that, and then following the seam, pull that out as one primal muscle. Again, this will take us down onto the fat. Again, just taking care not to cut into the underlying muscle. The judges are looking for nice, clean, working, good knife control with no deep slashes or incisions. Something nice and smooth, following the muscle, nice clean lines, and something compact. So that is our rump, pork rump, off, ready for further trimming. Just coming here onto our rump tail. So again, a lot of internal connective fat and tissue. So again, we trim this off as we go. We're going to follow through the natural seam around the edge of the muscle, and this will be taken off. This group of muscle here will be taken off so that it can be used for dice or further preparation, or finally down to mince. So again, it's important that if we're removing it, we trim it at the same time so that we don't have to revisit it at a later stage. So finally, we've got the whole silver side muscle. Again, we're going to trim this down from the inside and following down between two muscles. So the silver side has two muscles. It has the small, what we call the salmon cut, and we have the silver side flat. So at this point, I'm going to keep the two together, but just trim around, take them both out together, but removing the heavy fat that was between the muscles. So again, trimming this so we don't damage any of the underlying muscle. And then I'm working around the contour. I'm cutting down onto the rind because the judges will be looking for you to take out the silver side with the rind removed. So we now need to skin the rind off from the silver side. Again, it's just about taking care not to cut into the muscle. The judges at this point are looking for clean individual muscle primals with no slashes or deep incisions and no wrong cuts or been over trimmed with straight edges that has removed some of the edge of the product. Now in a competition, it might say that that is just taken off as it is, or they may be asking you to then take the fat off the rind, so you'd be skinning the rind off. So there's our silver side muscle ready for further trim, and there is our fat and rind. Any thick gristles that may be still attached again is separated, and then that can be put aside for further trimming as well. So here we have our seamed out primal silver side muscle and our top side seamed out muscle, our knuckle or thick flank, our pork chump or rump, our heel muscle, and finally our bone-in pork knuckle or shank. So that is our leg and chump of pork broken down into its 6 key main primals prior to further trimming